Let's get started with our first CDK application. To begin, we're going to make sure that we've got a long-term support release of Node installed. So if I just go and have a look for Node.js here, and we pop to the home page, you can see that 18.16.1 is the latest LTS at the time of recording. By the time you're watching this, it's probably going to be 20, because that's going to be the LTS very soon. In Node, it's always the even numbers that are LTS releases. So it'd be 18, 20, 22, and so on. So we need Node installed with an appropriate version. So I've got 18.16.0 here, which will absolutely do just fine. And then if you would like to, you can update the version of npm that we've got with npm installed -g for global npm, but that's optional. You can keep the version of npm that was bundled with Node if you prefer. We're also going to need the AWS CLI, and importantly, we want version 2. So I've got 2.11.20 here, which will do for us. A lot of documentation, bits and pieces online talk about version 1 and how to install that. And if you've installed the AWS CLI through a package manager on your operating system, you might find that you've got version 1, but we would like version 2. You're also going to need some AWS credentials set up for an account that you can deploy infrastructure into. So we're going to use a CLI profile for this, which I've called CDK course. And if I do AWS STS for the security token service, get caller identity, then we can see that here's our account ID, and we are logged in here using SSO for the AWS account I've created for this course. And that's completely empty at the moment. So we've got Node, we've got AWS credentials set up in whatever means you like. You don't have to use the CLI profile if you don't want to, you can use something else. We've got our editor, so we are ready to get started. If I go and Google CDK, we can find the project on GitHub. And then if we give it a bit of a scroll down, this will hopefully look pretty similar to when you're looking at this, when you're getting started. And you'll see here that there's some setup instructions. So the first thing they have you do is install the CDK package, AWS CDK, globally. And then we're going to use that CDK package in our project to get it started. But actually, I'm going to suggest a bit of a different approach, because we're going to try and avoid using a global version of the CDK CLI. The reason we do this is that you're going to have different projects that likely will have different versions of CDK installed at points in their lifetime. You might want to upgrade some of them, but leave the others as they are. And you always want to be able to go back to your project and have it run again. You don't want it to break just because you haven't looked at it in a few weeks or months. So we want to encourage people to interact with our projects in a way that means that we get the correct version of CDK, the version of CDK that we specify in that project. So we're actually not going to do this global install here. We're going to use npx instead. So let me pop open my terminal here, and I'm going to pop into a folder I've made for this. And let's make a new project called Getting Started. And then let's take the example from the documentation here, paste it in, but rather than having CDK just run here as a command that it expects to be installed, we're going to use npx in front of that. And then it says, I need to install this particular version of the CDK package, which we're fine with, that's okay. And then it will do the Node modules install. Lovely. So let's do an ls, and we see a lot of the usual suspects for a Node.js project. We've got Jest set up for testing. We have a package.json and a package lock indicating we're using npm. We've got our Node modules folder, and we've got a few files for bits of source code in bin and lib. While we're here, I just wanted to demo the fact that we don't have CDK installed globally. So if I do a which CDK, we don't get anything. I can try CDK and it says command not found. So we have to use npx or a package script if we want to call CDK. So I can do npx --no to say that I don't want you to download a version of CDK. I want you to use the one that's specified in this project, CDK, and then there we go. If we want to pass in some arguments into CDK when we run it, we have to add 2 dashes first and then the arguments. So if I run it that way, you can see we get version 2.87.0 CDK, which is great. If I'd forgotten those two dashes, then that dash version would actually get given to npm, or npx, sorry, I should say. And then we see we've got version 9.8.0 of npx, which isn't right with CDK. So I'm going to open this up in my editor, and then we can have a bit of a chat through what's in that project. So I have a README here that explains the getting started. And we've got a bin folder, and in the bin folder we have one TypeScript file which is creating a new app here, this app class exported from CDK, and then it's making a new getting started stack with that app. It's passing in the app to that and some kind of ID. You can see that this isn't actually part of the code, but WebStorm is highlighting this ID argument here so we can understand what this string might be. So it's the ID getting started stack. So what is getting started stack? Well, that's in the lib folder. So let's go and have a look in lib, and we can see there that we have getting started stack, which extends stack, and that's another thing exported by CDK. And it's got a constructor with a few arguments, and then it's doing something about a queue, something about a topic, and then something about adding a subscription to the topic with our queue. So they've given us a very, very basic application here, just to have a go with. So let's have a bit of a scan through the rest of the project. We have a test folder, and that's got a test in. And so what that's doing is making our getting started stack again, and then it's doing some stuff to make a template, and then it's doing some things with a template, what looks like some assertions. But we'll talk about testing in a later chapter. We have a git ignore, which is going to look very standard for Node projects. You might want to tweak this as you go along. I'm going to add the .idea directory for WebStorm, because I don't want any of the WebStorm files in this project to be checked in. We have an npm ignore, which is files that wouldn't get published by npm, and it's really not relevant for us in this project because we're never going to do an npm publish of this project, but it's there anyway. We have a CDK.json, which we'll talk through a little bit later. We've got a jest setup file here with ts.jest being used to transpile TypeScript code. And we've got our package.json, which we've had a little peek in already with a few scripts. Package lock's not going to be very interesting because it's just the resolved versions of the constraints in that package.json. Then we've got our README that tells you how to get going with the project. And finally, a tsconfig file for TypeScript. So let's have a look in CDK.json. So we've got a few main sections here. So there's the watch section, which we're not that interested in just yet. There's a context section here, which is a very large object, and this app line at the top. And the app line, or the app key, is a really critical one. And that's using npx here. So we know we're trying to use a package or binary or similar installed in this project to run tsnode. This preferred TS extensions is a tsnode flag. Don't need to worry about that too much. And then we're using that to call bin getting started. So this app line is telling CDK how to run our project, because when you call the CDK utility, it reads the CDK.json, tries to understand where the entry point into your code base is. In this case, it's going to be running tsnode and this bin getting started. And then it will use that to create all of the infrastructure. It then discovers all the things like the stack or stacks you've added, other the constructs and bits and pieces going on. Then we have watch, which is for when you're doing automatic updating or live reload or an equivalent to live reload. And we'll talk about that in another lesson. And then we have the context object, and this is a load of feature flags. And we're going to use context, this key, in our CDK.json a lot. And that's also covered in a later lesson because we're going to go into that into quite some detail. But you can probably guess here that you can turn things on and off as they release updates to the CDK CLI. So that is a bit of an overview of how we can create our first project by using npx, because we don't want to install CDK globally. We don't install CDK globally to make sure there are no conflicts between projects, to make sure we're always getting the right version, the version we intend. We used the init command there to create an application. Inside of our application, we had the entry point, if you like, which is the CDK.json. That tells CDK where to go to find our resources. That's in the bin folder. Our bin folder creates something called an app, which we'll talk about later. it creates a new stack and links it together with the app somehow, and that stack is in here, and then that gives us our project.